On the morning of September the 16th, 1994, 62 children at the Ariel School in Ruwa, Zimbabwe were playing outside during their morning break. The teachers were inside attending a staff meeting. What happened in the next 15 minutes would become one of the most well-documented close encounter cases in history, not because of radar data or military footage, because of the witnesses themselves. 62 children, ages 6 to 12, from different backgrounds, different families, different levels of maturity. None of them had access to UFO literature. Zimbabwe in 1994 had limited television, and American science fiction was not part of their cultural landscape. They all saw the same thing, they all drew the same thing, and 30 years later, not one of them has changed their story. So I want you to tell me, what would it take for you to believe 62 witnesses? Comment below. The children described a silver craft that descended into the rough scrubland just beyond the school boundary. Some described multiple smaller objects. The craft landed or hovered just above the ground, approximately 100 meters from where the children were playing. Then beings emerged. The children described them consistently. Small in stature, approximately 3 to 4 feet tall, grey or dark skin, enormous eyes, described by multiple children as large, black, and elongated. The beings moved in an unusual manner. Some children described a gliding motion, as if the being's legs were not quite touching the ground. Several children reported that one of the beings approached the fence line and made eye contact. Multiple witnesses stated that they received a telepathic communication, not in words, but in feelings and images. The message, as described independently by several children, concerned the destruction of the environment. That technology was harming the planet, that humans needed to take better care of the Earth. The children were terrified. Some ran inside, others stood frozen. When they told their teachers what had happened, the initial reaction was disbelief. Cynthia Hind, a respected UFO researcher based in Harare, arrived at the school within days. She asked the children to draw what they had seen before conducting any interviews. The drawings were remarkably consistent, the same shaped craft, the same proportioned beings, the same large eyes. Hind contacted John Mack, a Pulitzer Prize-winning psychiatrist and professor at Harvard Medical School. Mack was already conducting research into contact experiences and had developed a rigorous methodology for interviewing witnesses, particularly children. Mack travelled to Zimbabwe and spent 2 days at the Ariel School. He interviewed the children individually on camera, using age-appropriate techniques designed to avoid leading questions and detect confabulation. He assessed each child for signs of fabrication, social pressure, and shared fantasy. His conclusion was unambiguous. These children were describing a real experience. They showed the physiological signs of genuine recall, trembling, tears, emotional distress, not the detached affect of rehearsed stories. Their accounts were consistent in the core details, while varying in the peripheral details, which is the hallmark of genuine independent witness testimony. If they had coordinated their stories, the peripheral details would match too. Mack also noted that the children had no cultural framework for what they were describing. They were not interpreting their experience through the lens of science fiction or UFO mythology. Several of the younger children didn't even know the word alien. They simply described what they saw. For a hoax to explain the Ariel School incident, a number of conditions would need to be true. 62 children between the ages of 6 and 12 would need to have coordinated a detailed and consistent fabrication during a 15-minute break. Children who could not yet read or write would need to have produced drawings matching the descriptions of 12-year-olds. The younger children, some of whom were visibly distressed for days afterward, would need to have maintained their performance for weeks during repeated interviews with professional researchers. The school's headmaster, Colin Mackey, was interviewed extensively. He stated that he saw no evidence of coordination among the children. He noted that the accounts came from children across different year groups who did not routinely socialise with each other. Some were friends, many were not. The hoax hypothesis also requires explaining why the children reported a telepathic environmental message, a detail that no 6-year-old in rural Zimbabwe in 1994 would have any reason to fabricate, and which multiple children described independently using different words but conveying the same meaning. There is also the question of motive. These children had nothing to gain. Several reported being mocked by family members. The experience brought them unwanted attention and distress, not reward. In 2022, filmmaker Randall Nickerson released the documentary Ariel Phenomenon, which tracked down the original witnesses, now adults in their 30s. Their accounts had not changed, not in the core details, not in the emotional weight. The adults described the same craft, the same beings, the same telepathic message they had reported as children. Several became emotional during filming. One stated that the experience had defined her entire life. Another said he had spent years trying to rationalize what he saw before accepting that rationalization was not possible. This is significant because false memories degrade over time, details shift, narratives become internally inconsistent. The witnesses to the Ariel School incident show none of these markers. Their accounts have remained stable across 3 decades of independent recall. John Mack, who died in 2004, maintained until his death that the Ariel School case was among the most compelling he had ever investigated. He considered the children's testimony to be as reliable as any witness testimony he had encountered in his career. In any courtroom in the world, 62 independent witnesses providing consistent testimony would be considered overwhelming evidence. If 62 people independently described a car accident with the same details, no jury would question whether the accident occurred. The Ariel School case is not ambiguous. It is not a single witness claiming an experience that cannot be verified. It is 62 witnesses, interviewed individually, assessed by one of the most qualified psychiatrists in the world, producing consistent accounts that have remained stable for 30 years. The skeptical position requires believing that 62 children in rural Zimbabwe independently fabricated the same detailed encounter with beings they had no cultural reference for, maintained that fabrication under professional interrogation, and continued maintaining it into adulthood for no discernible reason. The alternative is simpler. Something landed near the Ariel School on September the 16th, 1994. 62 children saw it. They described what they saw, and they have never stopped describing it. 62 children can't all be wrong. If you've watched this far, you're someone who follows the evidence. So tell me, what's your verdict on the Ariel School? Comment below. I read everyone. Subscribe now and follow the evidence.